Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. It's the 10th of June. Joining me on this evening's programme, we have Siobhan Tolland, a regular contributor to the programme. Welcome back to the show. Siobhan, how are you?
Not too bad, Gordon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Just getting a bit warm here in the studio. And I understand it's also a bit warm where you are, Richard Thomson MP.
Aye, good evening, Gordon. It certainly is. I'm just in London waiting to come back up the road tomorrow. But aye, it's pretty warm here as well. And if you're if you're somebody from the north of Scotland like myself, you're used to cold days and hot coffees. And aye, weather like this we're not really built for.
Oh, well, we'll just have to stand it for the next hour or so, I'm afraid, Richard. Anyway, on to tonight's programme. And first of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 2,088,346 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,844,736 have been confirmed negative. 243,610 have tested positive. There are 735 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although, as you're probably aware, not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There was one new reported death of a person who tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who've now died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,679. This number only includes those who have died after receiving a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 124 were in hospital last night, 14 of whom were in intensive care. Now, as of 8 o'clock this morning, 3,441,217 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,345,181 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,867 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that's an increase of 7 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. Now, and in the news tonight, SAGE modelling is warning of a risk of a substantial COVID third wave. New modelling for the UK government's SAGE committee of experts has highlighted the risk of a substantial third wave of infections and hospitalisations, casting doubt on whether the next stage of Boris Johnson's COVID roadmap can go ahead as planned on the 21st of June. The UK government's sources suggested the outlook was now more pessimistic, but stressed that the decision would be taken after assessing a few more days' worth of data on the effect that rising infections are having on hospitalisations. Key UK ministers and officials are expected to discuss a range of options on Sunday, when Boris Johnson will still be hosting the G7, including a 2 to 4 week delay, as well as the possibility of watered-down reopening that keeps some rules in place. A Whitehall source said that it was broadly correct that the outlook was now more pessimistic. Cases are obviously higher and they are growing rapidly, the source said. Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London said that modelling updated this week suggested that there was a risk of a surge in infections and hospitalisations that could rival the second wave in January. Siobhan, let me start with you ladies first this evening. I think many people have been expecting this kind of announcement to be forthcoming. They've stopped short of completely saying that we're definitely into a third wave, but this isn't looking very good, is it?
No, it's not, and it really, really feels like this is the Emperor's kind of new clothes scenario again. I mean, everybody knew that this was going to happen. Sage warned us back in early April that the UK roadmap would lead to a surge in cases, and that was before the Indian variant was really even on the radar. The British Medical Journal reported that as well back in April. So this has been really on the cards. The Indian variant, of course, is made it much more complicated, and as we know from places like Dundee and Kirriemuir especially, the variant is spreading like wildfire. This new variant. So no, it's not surprising. And what annoys me most of all about this is the fact that it isn't surprising, and we should have been planning for this. We should have been planning for this much more significantly. And we've also got the situation on a global level, of course, that, we've just had 230 odd ex-leaders asking for the richer nations to pay 2/3 of the cost for world global vaccination. And at the same time, and Richard will probably tell you more about that as well, at the same time, we've got a discussion of reducing foreign aid to the globe. So we're sitting here in a situation where we thought we're all right because we've got loads of vaccinations. Then the Indian variant comes because it's still spreading like wildfire across the globe. And we're sitting, the UK sitting thinking, we're all right, Jack, but guess what? We're not. And it's that situation again where we're never, ever going to be safe until everybody is safe. So we've got two choices, haven't we? We either kind of lock down the borders or we make sure everyone in the globe is safe through the mass vaccination programme. It's depressing that we're kind of moving back into this again because it was so foreseen. And that's what I think is depressing about it. And as you know, I've said this numerous times as a shielder, it is a bit depressing. My sister-in-law's just been diagnosed with it as well, so it's coming very close to home. It's nobody wants to go into another situation where we think there's going to be a lockdown, for God's sake.
Yeah. Okay, Siobhan. Richard, if I could turn to you now. One of the things I think that's obvious about this, and from what Siobhan has just been saying, that the British government had been operating on the basis that if everybody in the UK was vaccinated, it would all be okay. But in the meantime, they've left the travel corridors open, and that obviously has allowed this new variant to take roots here. Is there, do you think, a case now for a complete lockdown of travel until COVID vaccination is rolled out across the rest of the world?
I think there is a case for tighter control of the borders, and there's some irony in the fact that we've got a Conservative government in London that has made great licks about the fact that it was going to take back control of borders and then conspicuously failed to do so throughout the pandemic that we've been going through. So, I think the nature of viruses is that they're always going to mutate. You're always going to get new variants. They'll take on new characteristics. But Siobhan's absolutely right. Nobody is going to be safe completely until everybody is safe. And while nobody wants to go back to lockdown and everybody wants to see society and the economy opening up again, we should have learned by now that when cases are on the rise, knowing what this can do, eventually, the later you leave it to act, generally the harder you do need to react when you eventually do. So I think that this 21st of June date that Boris Johnson has for lifting most of the remaining restrictions in England has to be called into question. And I think that a more cautious approach in England and in Scotland might be merited as we go forward to that. Because while we don't want to be living under the restrictions for any longer than we absolutely have to, I also don't want to see us have to go into the complete lockdown that we saw before. So I think the next few days are going to be utterly, absolutely crucial in terms of seeing what the trends are showing. And then the scientific advisors have to come to the conclusion about the balance of risks and what activities we can continue to do and what ones we might need to pause an unlocking on, or what steps we might need to take backwards. But as I say, that's not a direction that anyone wants to go in. But I would far sooner see that than have us this spiral out of control with our leaders in a state of denial and then having to put the brakes on all the harder.
Joe Biden, who is visiting the UK, of course, at the moment for the G7 meeting, has announced, in fact, in the last 24 hours, that the United States is planning to give 500 million doses of vaccine, presumably to the World Health Organization, to be distributed in countries across the globe who don't have access. Is there, do you think, coming from the United States, the first act of leadership that we actually need in order to get these other countries caught up? And in the meantime, should we stay locked down while that takes place?
No, I don't think we need to be locked down as we have been, but I think this is a significant act of leadership by the Biden administration. And, we all have, I'm sure, many of our viewers will have concerns about the way that America sometimes conducts itself in the international arena. But I think we're all relieved to see an American president who is reacting to this in the way that Biden does, it's absolutely impossible to imagine his predecessor showing any kind of interest in taking that kind of action. And it comes back to what Siobhan said right at the start, that really with this virus, none of us are truly safe until all of us are safe. And while the vaccines and the double vaccine seems to be effective against the new Delta variant, if there are large parts of the world still unvaccinated, then that just increases the opportunity for the virus to further mutate into potentially more dangerous forms. And I don't think we're ever going to get rid of this virus. I think it will be endemic in various forms. But we absolutely do need to make sure that it is tackled right around the world, because for all the vaccine chauvinism that we see at the moment from many in Westminster about the rate of progress that's been made, for all that we see that will count for nothing if new variants emerge which are resistant to any protections that the current suite of vaccines offer. So we need to make sure that countries follow where the Biden administration has led, not just in terms of doing it, but on that sort of scale, and help make sure that we reduce the ability of the virus to spread and mutate in as many parts of the world as we reasonably can. I once was involved in one of the local Rotary clubs. We did an awful lot of fundraising to campaign against polio, for the vaccines and the vaccination programs in Pakistan and India and Afghanistan and other places. We still haven't eradicated polio, but that's just an indication of how hard we're going to have to work to just make sure that we do eventually isolate and eliminate this if at all possible. As I say, I don't think we will. We can maybe suppress it to those levels, but we need to make sure that the rest of the world is getting the same sort of protection that we're all desperate to get ourselves.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. Richard Thomson there in London. Now, staying with President Biden, the President has warned the UK not to imperil the Northern Ireland peace deal. The US President Joe Biden will bring a grave Brexit warning to his first meeting with Boris Johnson. Prevent a row with the European Union from imperiling a delicate peace in Northern Ireland. On his first trip abroad since taking office in January, President Biden is meeting the Prime Minister today in the Cornish seaside resort of Carbis Bay, ahead of a weekend's G7 summit, a NATO summit on Monday, and a US-EU summit on Tuesday, and even a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva the following day. The President intends to use his trip to burnish his multilateral credentials after the tumult of Donald Trump's presidency, which has left many US allies in Europe and Asia bewildered and some alienated. But President Biden does have an uncomfortable message for Boris Johnson as he tells him to stop heated EU trade negotiations from undermining the 1998 US-brokered Good Friday Agreement, which ended 3 decades of bloodshed in Northern Ireland. The Irish Prime Minister, Michael Martin, said that President Biden's intervention in the disagreement between the UK government and the European Union over how to implement Northern Ireland's post-Brexit trade rules is a significant development. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, said today that the protocol was the one and only solution to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, and that she still saw fundamental gaps in the UK's implementation of it. Now, Siobhan, we've been following this story for some time now, and the so-called sausage wars seem to have broken out. As if Britain wasn't looking silly enough, we're now having a war over sausages. Why do you think this problem has arisen? The British government knew that this clause in the divorce agreement with the EU was there. They knew that there would be a ban on these chilled meats. Why are they complaining now?
Well, I mean, it seems to be the MO, I think, for Westminster in terms of Brexit. There's a kind of, there's a meme that goes around social media quite a lot, and it's about that kind of, I want to kind of cancel my Sky subscription, but I still want all the channels and all the, and the UK has that kind of attitude towards the European Union, and it's like, well, what do you mean it's going to be negative for us? What do you mean that that's going to happen? I mean, the whole process was rushed, it was chaotic, half the folk didn't even read what was in the terms, there's kind of incompetence there at an extraordinarily high level. But there's also that British exceptionalism that seems to come into all these discussions now, where it's like, well, what do you mean it's going to impact us badly? We're Britain. I mean, that was their strategy for about the first 6 months after Brexit. It's like, but we're Britain, but we're Britain, so there's that kind of, it's a really, really, it's embarrassing and quite kind of painful to watch, because it just comes across as so incompetent, so chasing their own tails constantly with this process. And as Biden's kind of warning is kind of very timely at this point, is this incompetence, this chaos that they seem to be embroiled themselves in is really kind of threatening peace across there as well. So, a timely intervention from Biden, and it's not unexpected given what he said in the lead up to the election and so forth as well. But this pattern happens again and again and again. What do you mean that's going to be a negative impact on us? It's like, well, did you not read the small print? It wasn't even that small print, kind of thing. So, it's quite bizarre, but it's not unexpected. This is the kind of strategy that the UK Parliament or the UK government seem to be employing at this stage.
Okay, Siobhan. Richard, one of the things, obviously on social media, people are all talking about the so-called sausage wars, but it seems to boil down to something very simple, and that was there was a part of the agreement in which the UK agreed that after a certain period of grace, that there would be an end to the transportation of chilled meat products from mainland UK into Northern Ireland, and that was written into the agreement. But now there's complaints that people in Belfast aren't getting their sausages from mainland UK anymore. Is this not surely just about sticking a union flag in a sausage and saying they must come from the UK? Surely there must be sausage factories in the Republic of Ireland.
Well, I'm sure there are. I mean, I'm old enough to kind of just about remember Yes Minister and the Christmas special one year, which marked the transition between Yes Minister and it becoming Yes Prime Minister. And there was this artificial ding-dong was whipped up for political gain about the Euro sausage, and there had to be a certain amount of meat content, and the British banger would no longer be allowed to be called the British sausage. It had to be the solid emulsified fat meat tube or something like that. So yeah, go and get the DVD box set out of the attic. It's worth a lot because it's hard to believe that would now be not dismissed as satire, but it's actually real. It's a more documentary. But from some of the rhetoric that we've had from Lord Frost and from the Northern Ireland Secretary and the Prime Minister himself about the impact of this deal, they must be absolutely fuming with the complete bloody idiots that negotiated and then agreed to this deal, given what they're saying now.
Wasn't Lord Frost one of the very people who negotiated it?
I do believe he was. As I say, they must be absolutely furious with the numpties that negotiated it because it's their own deal. That's the point. And, especially the Tory MPs who froth away at the back benches about we're Britain and how dare these Europeans hold us to what we said we would do. They themselves must be livid with all the MPs who tripped through the lobbies and early in the new year to vote this through. And that's the crux of it. This is about the UK's diminishing status as a country whose word can be trusted, which when it says it will do something, it will honour its commitments as a country that can be expected to uphold the rule of law and international law, when it threatened to break the law, but only in a limited and specific way. I'm sorry that I stole your television the other week, but I only did it in a limited and specific way. I don't think that one would ever stand up in the sheriff somehow. So that's the situation they're in. And I think the reason we're here now is Boris Johnson is the ultimate charlatan in politics. And he was deliberately trying to undermine Theresa May from day one because he wanted the top job. Now, Theresa May, of course, painted herself into her corner with her red lines. Now, she quite rightly and as I believe a genuine and sincere unionist, didn't want to see any kind of border between a trade border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's what she negotiated the backstop for. But of course, Boris Johnson had to stake out a different position, and all he did to get there was he tore up one of our red lines and laid it down the Irish Sea instead, and created that border there. Then lied to everyone about the fact that was what was going to happen. And I think there was a couple of reasons for that. One, it allowed him to say that he got Brexit done, and to do so before people really got wise to the
consequences.
The implications. And then we then go into this phase where they blame the dastardly Europeans and the dreadful Irish for insisting that we play the game and stick by what we agreed. So it's all a ploy. It's all pretty depressing stuff. But there's a real impact here for Scotland, because an independent Scotland is going to have a customs border, if it's in the EU, between the EU and England. So I think there's a very, very strong incentive for us to try and act as honest brokers in this and try and get the solution that's right. Now, of course, one of the things that could eliminate any problem about getting your British bangers, or whatever you want to call them, in Northern Ireland, if that's your thing, one of the things that could do that, get rid of about 80 to 85% of the checks overnight, is if we were to sign up to a Swiss-style sanitary and phytosanitary deal. Basically, in layman's terms, that means realigning with the European Union standards in food and agriculture. Now, of course, UK government doesn't want to do that because they think it will tie their hands in doing their trade deals. Quite frankly, they still haven't worked out how they can get these clever trade deals without diminishing the standards of animal welfare and food standards that other countries might wish to impose so that we accept their goods. So, quite frankly, the best thing they could do in the short term is sign up to that, and that might actually give them a bit of breathing space to work out how on earth they can get themselves out of this pickle. Of course, the best thing to do would have been not to have left the European Union, or at least not to have left the single market in the first place. Yeah. But all of this is providing a backdrop to the kind of independence campaign we'll be fighting, and the kind of answers that we'll need to be looking for in terms of how we manage that land border. It's not us that's going to create that land border, because on the 2014 prospectus there wouldn't have been one, but there now will be one as a result of the way that England has voted, and that creates something for us to wrestle with as well.
Okay, well, something for the future. But staying with the whole issue of food and importing and exporting it, Scottish businesses are now under threat from damaging UK trade deals. The SNP today warned that the Scottish businesses are being forced to pay a heavy price for the UK government's damaging Brexit policies, with the party highlighting the mounting costs facing Scotch whisky sector. At international trade questions in the House of Commons today, SNP MP Drew Hendry cited Speyside Distillery, the winner of the best whisky at the World Whisky Awards, which has warned that since Brexit, its sales are down by 20% on margin. Cardboard costs are up 12%, glass up 7%, and they are facing increased shipping costs and delays, with extra paperwork alone adding another 33 pence to each case. Adding to the pressure on the UK government, a joint letter from Scotland's farming, food and drinks firms highlighted the threat of a UK-Australia trade deal. In a letter to the UK government's Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, the 14 signatories warned that there is a real concern that the pace of negotiations over a proposed UK-Australia trade deal is too quick and denying the opportunity for appropriate scrutiny and consultation. It goes on to say that the risks are enormous for the whole food and drink supply chain, and that any trade deal which does not prioritise the maintenance of our standards of animal welfare and environmental protection would be detrimental to businesses, consumers and the UK's reputation. They urged the UK government to establish a more rigorous and meaningful process of engagement with the industry, and to urgently undertake an assessment of the cumulative impact the proposed free trade agreement will have on sectors across the food and drinks industry. Now, Siobhan, as if it wasn't bad enough that the seafood producers are finding it impossible to trade with Europe, we're now finding that the rest of the food and farming sector in Scotland is being threatened by lower quality food coming in at low cost and low prices from this Australian trade deal. How seriously do you think the British government is taking this issue, and do they care enough, do you think, to answer these criticisms?
Well, I think if we go on past past actions, then I think not. I think it's one of those situations where, and I think again it's the MO of Westminster is that it's Brexit at all costs. Also, the style of government that that Westminster is employing, or the Conservatives are employing, and they've done that since the minute they got into power, is distinct lack of consultation with anybody that is connected to that process. There was distinct lack of consultation with the countries that were involved in Brexit. So now we've got this example where, as the kind of food industry leaders in Scotland have said, that there is this lack of negotiation and a lack of kind of a lack of consultation on what is best, or what the food industry think is best for themselves. There is a complete ignoring of the needs of nations, industry, people, well-being, etc. It's a very singular British process of get Brexit done, and we seem to be just down that kind of path significantly. I mean, that letter that you were talking about, what kind of struck me is the amount of industries that letter covered. There's seafood, milk, meat, haulage, pigs, crofting industry, the National Farmers Union, the Scottish food and drink industry. So, we've got a lot of people becoming very, very concerned about the impact of the quality of the food and the reputation for the quality of the food within Scotland and the UK in general. And it's, as Brexit has been, it's almost symbolic of basically a complete retreat from democracy in that sense, because there's never negotiation, there's never compromise, and there's never an attempt to win people over in that process. It's basically, it's our way or no way. And unfortunately for the kind of the large food and drink industry within Scotland and in England, we're feeling the brunt of that quite significantly now. But Brexit is just this continuous process of stripping democracy down at a very, very governmental level. Basically, you've got about 5 or 6 people that seems like making the decisions, and nobody else gets a look in.
Okay, Siobhan, listen, hanging on to this theme of diminishing standards, Richard, would it be true to say, do you think, that the major thinking of the British government, if there is any thinking going on, is that if we're going to let food come in from the Australians, which has far lower standards of husbandry and phytosanitary standards, then we have to also drive the standards down in this country. Is this an attempt, do you think, by the UK government to force standards and costs of food production down so that we can then compete with the Australians in this race to the bottom?
I think that's absolutely what's going to end up happening. I mean, if you listen to UK government ministers, they have this great conceit that all parts of the UK make the best produce, and there are high-value markets emerging in the world at the rate at which the Chinese market is growing and all the rest of it. But so somehow you can carry on as you were with your high-quality product and sell it for higher prices elsewhere, while consumers at home eat more imported food. Now, quite why anyone would think that is sensible economically, I'm familiar with Adam Smith and the trade theories of comparative advantage, but I think this has taken it to extremes. But then even consider the environmental impact of that. Now, I think that beef farming is a potential to be can be highly sustainable. We expect our farmers to perform a role as custodians of the land. I think they do that very well by and large. But the idea that you're going to ship food thousands of miles around the world when you can produce it perfectly well at home, just in order to pursue this dogma of free trade, is, to me, absolutely bonkers. And I just cannot fathom, other than sheer desperation and ideological fulfillment, to the god of free market economics. I just cannot understand why any sensible, rational government would want to pursue that, let alone given that some of the traditional sectors and those who are employed and working in them tend to vote Conservative anyway. Quite why the Conservatives are doing this to their own voters in the farming community is absolutely beyond me. Of course, the farming community may just take this as its cue that it's never been uniformly Conservative, but I think the Fisher folk have had their eyes opened with the way that they've been thrown under Brexit. I think the farming community is rapidly coming to that conclusion as well, that they've been similarly treated, and all the assurances that they've had before Brexit and subsequently are worth absolutely nothing. And it's it took a great talent to negotiate a deal on fisheries that was worse than the one that the fishermen were complaining about to begin with. But I think in terms of maintaining the high standards that our producers want to maintain, in terms of being able to provide sustainable produce and high value, high quality produce for our home market, in terms of maintaining high environmental standards and maintaining access to our closest markets, it's quite clear that we need alignment with the single market again. And in Scotland's case, the only way to that is going to be through independence.
Let's leave that subject there. Okay. Now, moving on. There have been calls for Scottish Tories to disown classroom propaganda. There are growing calls for Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross to disassociate himself and his party from a paper published by a think tank which calls for the UK government to intervene in Scotland's schools and to force teachers to deliver politically motivated history lessons. The paper by the Council on Geostrategy has been endorsed by senior Scots Tory MP Andrew Bowie, a vice chair of the UK Conservatives. Commenting, the SNP MSP Rona Mackay said that the paper is so spectacularly ill-informed about the historical, political and democratic case for independence that it's hard to know where to begin. Ms Mackay said the fact that senior Scottish Tories are actively encouraging the suggestion that Boris Johnson should start meddling in Scotland's schools by forcing teachers to deliver a Tory-led version of history almost beggars belief. Now, if we weren't unhappy enough at the way we have been lied to over things like Brexit and farming and fishing, now we're being told by this think tank that the British government is going to try and, rewrite Scottish history and force our teachers to teach it to children. Siobhan, how likely is it that any Scottish teacher is going to put up with that?
This is just fantasy. Imperialism, isn't it? It's just, honestly, I am blown away by the utter stupidity of even pitching something like that. On so many levels, it's the arrogance of it, for a start. It is just quite remarkable. I know that the EIS are having a conference, so that'll probably be the tea time talk,
Yeah.
But it really is quite remarkable to kind of even think, even to get as far as formulating thought in that process to start interfering with how we teach our own history and our own structure, and kind of just sanitize that into an ultra right-wing discourse is utterly bizarre. But do you know what, in this, in the spirit of it, I'm going to just say short and sweet on this one. Do you know what, it will make no difference whatsoever. Scotland's course is on towards independence, and all the kind of interference that they want to make will only increase that pace towards independence more rapidly. The level of complete and utter misunderstanding of the Scottish psyche comes out every single day, and that is probably the most stupid one in the last couple of months. But there's been many more. But if they think that this is going to stop the path towards independence, then they really have no idea what they're dealing with.
Well, we shall see. Richard, what was your reaction to this story? I'm sort of thinking and smiling to myself that I'm personal friends with one of the most senior figures in the EIS, and I know what he would think of this. But what do you think of it?
Well, once I'd checked the calendar to make sure it wasn't the 1st of April, and then after my laughter subsided.
Did you check the date as well to make sure it wasn't 1745?
Well, indeed. You know, Andrew Bowie, where do you start? You know, he's got form. Let's just say. I mean, Andrew Bowie was the chap who appeared at a fringe event at a Tory conference a couple of years back, run by, I think it was Policy Exchange, and he was complaining bitterly that devolution had gone too far because the First Minister had even been given control over Edinburgh Castle, for goodness sake. And Andrew was going to scale the Castle Rock and reclaim it for the Union, and
Oh dear.
just because the First Minister had been given the power to hold functions there. It was absolutely unreal. But, to be serious about this, I mean, I remember getting taught very, very little history at school, and in the end I went off and did a joint honours degree in history at university. But we got a little bit of Scottish history at primary school, about the Highland clearances. I got some at high school, and that put me, well ahead of many others who hadn't had that experience through the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, as it was in my case. But one of the things I've learned is, in Scotland, we've got a unique. Everybody has a unique perspective in the world. There's nothing special about having your own unilateral perspective in the world. But when you think about some of the big trends that are affecting the world today, like industrialisation and economic change, well, of course, Scotland was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution because of the black band of coal and iron ore running through Lanarkshire that made it easy. And then, of course, the proximity to the Clyde that then led to the industrialisation and shipbuilding and the steel making and everything that went on like that. So we've experienced that shift from the agrarian to the industrial. We were the first country in the world in many respects to go through that. So we understand how the forces of economics buffet people's lives. History isn't about kings and queens for me. It's about the impact it has on everyday life for people. We've got our own unique story about immigration and emigration, and as we see people buffeted around the world through wars and conflict and climate change, I'd like to think there's an empathy there from Scots, because our whole experience has been one of welcoming people to our shores and seeing our own people head off to find better opportunities elsewhere. They've also, we should also, getting back to the Union Jackery of this, I welcome teaching children about the empire and our role in it, as long as we do it honestly, warts and all. For better or worse, that is our experience, and we were a part of it after the Treaty of Union, and there's no getting away from that. Scots were not victims, they were active participants in it, and we need to recognise that. So I'm all for a full and honest warts and all approach to teaching Scotland's history to Scotland's pupils, but I think it's foolish for anyone to try and politicise it and try and use that to set children's and young minds on train tracks that will lead them to a particular set of political views or constitutional destination, because people are more complex than that. For years, Scottish history arguably been undertaught, and yet here we are on the cusp of potentially another independence referendum and re-establishing ourselves as a state. It just doesn't work. So let's teach our kids Scottish history. Let's teach our place in the world. Let's teach them that we're not better. We're not better than anyone else. We're no worse than anyone else. We are who we are, and this is our story, and this is what we need to. This is what it can teach us for the future, and this is how it can help us to be empathetic to the stories of others around the world, wherever they happen to come from. I think that's the best way for it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. Okay, moving on now. And the Health Secretary has written to the Right Honourable Matt Hancock MP about the vaccine supply. The Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, has written to the Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, to ask what more can be done to accelerate the supply of the Pfizer vaccine in the coming weeks. Writing ahead of the four-nation health minister meeting today, he stressed the need to bring forward the supply of Pfizer. He stated that the vaccination programme in Scotland could maintain or increase its pace if we had greater supplies of the Pfizer vaccine, which is due to reduce in supply in the coming weeks before picking up again in July. This, Siobhan, seems like a perfectly reasonable thing for Humza Yousaf to request. Do we know why the Pfizer vaccine is going to be in short supply? Has there been any reason given? We understand that there is going to be a dip in the manufacturing of it. Is this just due to some kind of shortage?
I think so. I honestly don't know, but I mean, there has been shortages in the past. There was a dip, I think it was at March, maybe. There was a dip at that point as well, and remember the Scottish Government kind of preparing for that dip and so forth. But of course it's become a bit more urgent now. Back then we had a sense that maybe it was under control, but given what we were talking about at the start of this programme, and the genuine and real concerns about a third, fourth, fifth wave, whatever we're on now, then obviously it becomes a bit more urgent, and any even small shortage could be potentially kind of difficult for us to manage, and because of course the quicker we can all get vaccinated, the better, and we know that against the Indian variant, whilst it's relatively good, it's still lower in terms of protection than it was against even the Kent variant. So there are real issues here, and of course it needs the second vaccine, the second dose of the vaccine, in order to be kind of quite robust against the Indian variant. So it's become much more urgent, and yes, I can see how a kind of Hamza would definitely write and ask for kind of these, whether I have to admit, when I was reading it, I thought, well, that's just going to go on the never to be looked at pile, by Boris Johnson, because it's not something that they take very seriously. But yes, I think it just shows the urgency now, and the concern perhaps that we're now beginning to experience because of the Indian variant and we're we're less protection from it.
Okay, Siobhan. Richard, what's your view of this? Hamza has obviously written this letter to Matt Hancock, perhaps in the expectation that there might be some extra supplies of the vaccine, perhaps stockpiled against this very kind of spike in cases. But is that the case?
Again, like Siobhan, I don't really know the answer to that. But what I could see in this is that because you need the double dose, it's not just as simple as get as much vaccine as you can into as many arms as possible. You've got to, in some sense, make sure that once you've vaccinated somebody for the first time, that in that optimum 8 to 12 week period, you've then actually got vaccines that are usable to provide that second dose at the same time as you're continuing to provide the first dose. So there's a complex set of calculations involved in there in terms of calculating the throughput and making sure that logistically in the supply chain, you've got the number of vaccines that you need at any given point, exactly the locations that you need them. And I'm sure that the professionals behind the vaccination programme in Scotland will have flagged this up and said, look, you've seen a potential crunch coming. In terms of a drop-off in supply, and that will be the basis on which it's done. I can't imagine that there's any other basis other than the one that is being stated as a reason for getting it. So while I don't know exactly what the reasons are why there might be a dip in supply at this point, I think that I would only take the assumption that this is a request that is made based on solid evidence and based in good faith. And if it's possible to recalibrate and reallocate between the different vaccines in different parts of the UK by the UK government, since it's the entity that's procuring the vaccine, then if that can be done, then it should, because it's in everybody's interest to make sure that we're vaccinating as many people as we can, as quickly as we possibly can. And if that ends up being hindered because there's a surplus of a particular vaccine in one part of the UK that would be better deployed in another part, then it's I think that would be unforgivable.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. Now, moving to Russia now for our next story. A Russian court has banned groups linked to Alexei Navalny. A Russian court has outlawed groups linked to the jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny after declaring them extremist, a move that bans his allies from elections and will further strain US-Russia ties before a closely watched summit. President Biden and Russian President Putin are due to hold talks in Geneva next week, and the fate of Navalny and the crackdown on his movement is certain to be on the agenda. Washington, which has called on the Kremlin to free Navalny, condemned the court decision, with the State Department calling it particularly disturbing. The ruling, the latest in a chapter of long-running crackdown on Putin's fiercest domestic opponent, delivers a final hammer blow to the vast political network that Navalny built up over many years to try to challenge Putin's grip on power. Now, first of all, Siobhan, this is obviously a story which has been running for some time now. Alexei Navalny seems to have been very heavily victimized by the Russian state and obviously under the direction of Vladimir Putin. Is there, do you think, a reason why Navalny's been cracked down on just before Putin meets with Biden. Is this some sort of gesture, or does Putin perhaps just not care?
I think there's a bit of kind of machismo political posture in there, isn't there? That on an international level, there's a flex in the muscles. I think it it's quite. It reminds me of kind of Trump in a way. It's that kind of like the big I am. But actually massively serious implications, to kind of completely destroy the opposition. So it's kind of really serious stuff, actually, and it reminds us yet again how fragile democracy is. And we kind of turn our back for 1 second, and then it's kind of begins to disintegrate. But it's an interesting one, I think, because it's if you think about the comparison between Biden and Trump probably would have been quite impressed at that kind of kind of
Yeah.
male kind of I'm gonna be the big man type of thing, whereas Biden I think will be distinctly unimpressed by it. So make for interesting conversation, but it's difficult times, isn't it? And this
Yeah.
kind of global disintegration of democracy is becoming, I think, really concerning. It feels like we're moving down a kind of very slippery slope on it, not just an individual country level, but on a global level as well. And that includes Westminster there as well. There's a lot of kind of perfectly respectable organisations that are being classed as extremist or reclassed as extremists within the UK too. So we're not immune to that, not to the quite extent of being banned, but we do have situations where Westminster tried to bypass Parliament for Brexit. That was a complete and utter bypassing of the democratic, or an attempt to bypass the democratic process, not quite to the extent of banning the opposition, but we've still got our own issues here as well, so we're not immune to that. It's a difficult time, isn't it? It really requires quite a radical rethink about how we move forward as a nation and as a globe and in the globe generally, and hopefully Scotland will play. It goes back to what Richard was saying earlier on about being an honest broker. There's an element here where hopefully Scotland can participate in the new social democratic structures that seem to be growing across the globe.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you very much. Richard, do you think, as Siobhan is saying, that with global uncertainty at the moment, caused partly by COVID and this entire sort of restructuring of global infrastructure, that perhaps autocrats and authoritarian regimes like Putin's are beginning to feel insecure, and this is his way of stamping his authority and retaining control over Russia?
I think so. I mean, even the most seemingly impregnable dictator is not impregnable. Eventually, at some stage, the tide turns. And there have been many pretenders to political leadership in Russia that Vladimir Putin has seen off by fair means and foul. But Navalny, I think he's found far harder to deal with, partly because of Navalny's, extensive social media presence and the ability that he has to reach people. And but I think that fundamentally, whether it's Navalny or anyone else, this is what you see. The problem we're seeing in Russia is we have this almost kleptocratic state, which is kept, or Putin is kept in power by his own patronage, where the police and the security services are politicised, where the courts are neutered, where the media is tame, and as I say, it is basically run as a kleptocracy rather than any other kind of ocracy. I think that makes it very dangerous because for all that Putin has changed the constitution to allow himself to remain in office, previously, his powers, will weaken. His stance will weaken. Other people will emerge. Somebody will be looking at some point to take over from him, and I think that it would. He is clearly very, very unsure and uncertain of his position because whether or not this is some kind of gesture before the G7 or not, I think is perhaps immaterial. I think you can just take this at face value on its own terms and say that these are not the actions of a world leader who is at all confident about his position, either internationally or domestically. And I think on a number of fronts, Vladimir Putin has been he has not projected the strength that he might wish. He has squandered influence that he and his country could potentially have had. And I think by ultimately the gathering of the power of the state around him and embodied in him as one individual, well, that has shored up his position in the short term. It sows the long-term seeds of his political demise, because he will not be president of the Russian Republic forever, and eventually somebody will come along who is stronger or badder than him, and eventually the people will, assert themselves, and something more akin to a liberal constitutional order will begin to emerge. Obviously, I very much hope it's the latter. As I say, these are not the actions of a strong, confident leader at ease with himself, who knows that he is held in high regard by the people over whom he governs.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, Richard. Now, moving from the paranoia of national figures to something a little bit more mundane now, and the remobilising of NHS dentists. Additional funding up to £5 million is to be made available to NHS dentists to help remobilise services as Scotland recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. This new funding will help NHS dental practices to purchase, renew or upgrade ventilation equipment, as improved ventilation in surgeries can substantially reduce the time between seeing patients and offer dental teams the opportunity to see more patients safely. Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf said that the remobilisation of the NHS is one of the number one priorities, and the Scottish Government remains committed to ensuring that NHS dental services emerge from the pandemic well placed to care for the oral health of the population. The new funding is seen as an important step in ensuring the continued remobilisation of NHS dental services and to ensure that more patients can be seen safely. The Scottish Government will also continue to fund free PPE for the dental sector, and from July will increase it by up to 50%. Funding will be available throughout this financial year and will be distributed by NHS boards to those practices meeting the scheme's conditions. Very briefly, if you would, Siobhan, since we're a little bit time limited tonight, this is a good news story, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that it highlights, I think, the issues that the SNP were raising in their manifesto before the election. That if we can, in terms of free dental care, so part of the reason is that we can actually prevent dental problems becoming so severe that people end up in hospital. And I think there's an element here of trying to prevent dental problems, because we've all had to delay with dental issues, myself included, over the last kind of few months during COVID as well. So there's a situation, I think, as well, where it's a kind of an attempt to try and stave off the kind of the extreme difficulties that we could end up with collectively because of the kind of lack of dental care that we've had. I mean, I know I'm needing 3 films, had to wait for about 18 months for them. But yes, so it is a good news story, and I think it's desperately needed. And if we're going to prevent further problems down the line for dental costs as well as dental pain that people have, then it needs to be done as quickly as possible, I think.
Okay, Siobhan. Richard, I'm one of those people like Siobhan who had to wait a long time recently just to get a new tooth fitted. And I remember having to stand outside the surgery for quite a long time waiting to go in. Surely this is going to be a great boon to the dentist, because if the ventilation is improved within things like waiting areas, people will be able to sit inside, not get soaked in the rain, and the dentists will be able to work their way through a lot faster.
But I just think the fact that surgeries are going to be able to reopen in a form somewhere closer to normal is a really good news thing here. I mean, obviously, there's an awful lot of aerosol treatments, and that was the reason that dentists were closed down, was the difficulty of protecting dentists and patients from the infection. I think Siobhan's absolutely right. This is something that a lot of people have been waiting for. Not just for those who need immediate work, but there'll be dental problems that have been building up over this time.
Yeah.
Scotland hasn't sadly been known for having the best of dental health over the decades, and my concern particularly is for the children who haven't been getting the regular checkups and problems being identified at an early stage that could be treated. We've always had throughout the pandemic access to emergency treatment in hospitals for those who really did it. But I think this is great news and just another further step back to some kind of normality. And if improved ventilation and surgeries allows that to happen, then let's crack on.
Okay, a good news story. Well, staying with the subject of children and young people for this next story, support for children and young people's well-being is to be increased. Children and young people most affected by COVID will be supported by a £20 million grant to create opportunities to socialise, play and reconnect this summer. Councils will receive £15 million and up to £5 million has been allocated to a coalition of 18 national partners to further strengthen and build on existing summer provision in addition to what's usually on offer. The support provided by councils will specifically target those aged up to 25 from low-income households who may otherwise struggle to access such experiences during the holidays. The Education Secretary, Shirley-Anne Somerville, said Scotland's children and young people have experienced significant disruption to all aspects of their lives as a result of COVID-19, including their well-being, education and social connections. They've told us that their mental health was a primary concern as a result of the pandemic, and they need a range of activity to help them reconnect with their peers and friends. This seems a very natural thing for us to do to help children, Siobhan, isn't it? To make it safe and possible for them to reconnect with their friends.
It's a great thing, and it is a really good feel-good story, and it's reminded me, me and my friend are doing some kind of street artwork, or preparing for it, and one of the things that we're doing is Bairns First, and I think it fits in very much with that. Is like kids deserve the greatest summer we could possibly give them, because the last 18 months have been absolutely hell for them, especially the poorer kids, because these kids are the kids that have to take priority as well, because they've been, especially if we look at the built up areas, it's been hard enough to live in kind of built up areas with very few green spaces, but in a COVID environment, that's been quite an entrapping, I think, experience for kind of young families, and especially young poorer families as well. So it's a great news story. I'm just going to kind of give a counteracting of that. My sister teaches down in England, and she was saying that when they went back to school, the school was very much prepared to do exactly that, to help the kids reintegrate, lots of outdoor games, basically just allowing the kids to recommunicate again, get back into the basis of kind of just becoming friends with other kids again. And of course the testing came in, and it all had to get abandoned because the government brought in tests and so forth. So how we help our kids get through the next phase will probably be just as important as in the recovery as to what they've experienced. And I think that kind of contrast between what the kind of the education did in England and what the Scottish government is doing here is very symbolic again of how we're kind of moving forward with that. Kids need to be protected. They need to have fun. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They need a summer where they can have the best fun they possibly can, and I for one am going to be right in there and trying to kind of build something and alongside all that kind of funding that's going to be available.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you. Very briefly, if you would, Richard, children need to have fun, yeah?
Absolutely, and as a dad of two lively girls, I want to have as much fun with them as I possibly can this summer as well. I really don't have anything to add to what Siobhan has said on there. It's been a tough old year and a half for kids, and we need to do the best that we absolutely can for them to get them out, active, exercising again, and socialising and mixing with their friends, because it's been a rotten couple of years for them, and not great for the adults either. But I'm certainly looking forward to a summer of fun with my kids.
Well, let's hope so. Our final story this evening, very briefly. Loganair has introduced a £1 carbon charge on its fares. The Scottish airline Loganair has launched their Green Skies programme aimed at mitigating the environmental impact of flying, with a goal to make their operations carbon neutral by 2040. The airline say they have already been working hard on projects behind the scenes. The First part of their initiative includes the introduction of a £1 charge on every customer flight, which will go towards fully offsetting the carbon emissions generated by Loganair's operations. Loganair's future plans include the introduction of sustainable aviation and hydrogen fuel, in addition to battery electric and hydrogen-powered light aircraft in incremental phases as technological advances allow. Siobhan, I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this because we really are just about out of time, but a good news story, yeah?
Yes, it is a good news story, although I'll have a kind of caveat to that. And a question I want to ask is how much of Loganair's profits is going to be put towards this? Because it sounds like the customers are going to be paying. But that's all I've got to say, and that must have been under 30 seconds.
Okay, very, very good. A record quick reply from Siobhan there. Richard, can you better that?
I don't know. I need practice making short speeches, so here goes. Yeah, step in the right direction if it's being invested wisely. Technology is the way forward, because it's not air travel that's the problem, it's the pollution it causes. So if you can have battery-powered planes or hydrogen-fueled planes, so much the better. Fundamentally, I think the thing we need to do is look at how we tax air travel. It's unfair to tax where it's a lifeline service from the mainland from islands to the mainland in quite the same way as we do. Equally, if you've got great rail links instead, then maybe those are the sorts of routes that we should be looking at charging more. Just throw that idea out there. But I think we need to be a bit smarter about how we tax air travel as well. That's
okay,
part of the solution.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your brevity, and to Siobhan Tolland as well. It just remains for me to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland is still holding its crowdfunder. We need your help. We need your regular help to support us on a monthly basis. We are trying to raise enough money to hire staff, and that's the next step in the evolution of this channel. So if you'd like to help us, please follow the link on your screen now. But just remains for me to thank both Richard Thomson MP and Siobhan Tolland for joining me this evening, and we'll see you all again on the next edition of Scotland at 7. Good night.